10x your service design offering with Smapply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at smapply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Smapply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Thinking about joining our private design community? Now's the time. On November 1st, our annual membership goes up from €199 to €299. But here's the good news. Join before then, and you lock in the $199 price for life. That's lifetime access to all our courses, a personal coaching call, plus 24 office hour sessions with Gerry and the community every year. No increases, no surprises, just big value. Don't wait. Join us today. Link is in the description.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of This Is HCD. Today on the show, we're delighted to welcome Thea Snow. Thea Snow is a director at the Centre of Public Impact, is currently based in Melbourne, and we explore powerful ideas in this one where everything is everything. And we dive into why imagination matters in government, how systems shape people's agency, and the role of space and design and justice and cohesion. Just three things that really jumped out at me in this conversation. Thea is challenged to go beyond models and see the hidden connection that makes systems work. The second thing I think you're going to like is the reminder that government isn't just about doing, it's also about being, and the beliefs and the values underneath it all. The third thing is the link between physical design and justice, and how the way we build spaces can empower and break communities. If you care about systems, if you care about good design, if you care about reimagining government for good, you're going to absolutely love this conversation. Thea is a rock star. I know you're going to enjoy it. Let's jump straight in.
The role of that imagination in government, I think, is an interesting question. We're also doing some work at the moment, and this is where the everything is everything sort of idea came from.
That was your...
that was the catalyst for this. Yeah, for this conversation.
Did you write that on LinkedIn a few weeks ago?
Yeah, exactly. I was looking back at our messages, and I was like, "What was the catalyst for this?" Yeah, and that was it. Yeah,
I saw you wrote that, and I was like, "All right, enough of this kind of fanboying from a distance. Gotta slip into the DMs."
Well, I was delighted that you did. But and that's sort of where that's come from is a piece of work that's really looking at what are the conditions that need to be in place for people in communities to really step into their agency and participate and contribute and feel like they've got control and power over their lives and able to shape what happens to them. And that's where that's a fascinating piece of work. So I'd be happy to talk about that as well.
Everything is everything. Did you come up with that?
No, I didn't. It was a brilliant woman called Amanda Tattersall.
Okay.
She's got her own podcast too, actually.
Yeah.
And we were looking at a model that sort of tries to map the different levels of the system, if you like, that influence a kid's life. So it starts with the kid in the centre, and then it moves out to the kid's family and parents and school, and then it moves out to the sort of the environment that the kid lives in, and then it moves out again to like the economic system, and then it moves out again to like the chronosystems, the furthest out layer, which is time. And we were using that model to sort of help make sense of a bunch of research that we were doing. And she was an interviewee. And I sort of tested the model with her, and she just paused and said, well, the model helps you make sense of things, but everything is everything.
Bing, 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 bing.
Exactly. And, it's such an important point, because what those models do is they make things easy to classify and categorize, which we love doing because then it makes more sense to us. But what they don't allow us to do is map the connections and explore the relationships between things. And actually that's such an important part of what makes
The
systems
value network.
work.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. I remember years ago, do you know Gerry Gaffney in Melbourne?
No.
He's a UX consultant, now semi-retired. But I remember working with Gerry in New South Wales Gov and some Victorian Gov stuff. And he wrote a book with Caroline Jarrett around form design. And we did a podcast together on how organizations' design forms can dictate how they actually relate with their customers and their citizens. So you can actually see a correlation between, how they're operating in terms of siloed thinking and breaking down experiences and stuff. And I was like, really, let's try it. And sure enough, he was able to do it. So everything is everything. Like how they do one thing is how they do things at scale.
Yeah. Well, we were talking just yesterday. Actually, we held that workshop that Mel Raymond was at.
Yeah.
And it was looking at adjacent but sort of similar kinds of issues. So it was a workshop that was specifically focusing on the efforts that are underway in Australia to address polarization and sort of strengthen social cohesion. And what we were trying to do was we did a bit of mapping of the system, not comprehensive by any stretch, but we just started to say, who's doing work in this space? Because there's so many people doing work in this space. And how can we bring them together to have a conversation and to, I guess, plant the seeds for them to work less as like atomized interventions and more as a deliberate portfolio or a collective of system interventions that are working in concert with one another to sort of drive towards a shared outcome. And we had Dan Hill. Do you know Dan Hill?
Oh, yeah. I've never met him, but I'm another fan.
Yeah. So he was he sort of was on the panel that started off the day. And what he was talking about, which is just completely fascinating, is the way that physical design of building spaces, footpaths, cities can contribute to or inhibit people's ability to feel connected to each other, to feel safe in their environment, and therefore to be active citizens. And he said, what did he say? It was so fascinating. He said, what we believe justice looks like is expressed through how we build courts and court
100%.
systems. And I just thought that was like it's not something I've ever thought about before, but it's so true.
Yeah. Oh, no, very true. I worked in courts in Melbourne and Sydney and across New South Wales, but how justice is delivered says so much about the fabric of society. If you look at the Indigenous kind of alternatives, if you want, the Koori Court and how they are able to communicate and create systems of change in a much more collective and a more humane way of doing things. And they talk about responsibility and accountability. Whereas I did an episode only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I have had a specific type of person I wanted after the podcast for 7 years, and that is a judge. Someone who is, the deliverer of justice, and that was District Court Judge Gillian Hussey. And we had 4 people who had been sentenced to prison on the podcast at the same time. And I said, what is the metrics of success for a judge? And they were like, there are none. And I was like, really? I said, in your 45 years as a district court judge, you never had anyone say, listen, good job, bad job, and you need to improve your... No. So I was like, find that really fascinating. I echo what Dan Hill was talking about there. It is really kind of enlightening when you think about it.
Yeah, well, there's this brilliant initiative called Maram Nagalagambu, and it's in Victoria. And what they do is it's for...
Bring them on the podcast. They're in the background. Bring them in.
They're barking at my son.
Yeah.
So they set up the whole space differently, right? So rather than the magistrate sitting up high, they sit on
low
around a table. They put culturally sort of safe, they'll put possum skin and basically create an environment which makes the young Indigenous folk who are coming to the court feel safe and represented and held in the space. And through creating a physical space that creates that safety, it shifts their whole ability to engage. And I just think it's so, so often we think about the processes or the form, even like the forms, like you mentioned before, like I think that's fascinating, but there's a lot of the behavioral science stuff goes into that. Like you change one word in a form and the whole thing changes. I think we sort of often think about the practicality of physical space before we think about, the user experience or the felt sense that's created. So it's what those spaces are optimizing for is like efficiency and sort of the flow of people and all the things that sort of, you think that buildings are supposed to do, rather than the sense of calm or the sense of connection or whatever it might be that are equally important.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually the buildings are kind of primary and then everything else is layered on top of that.
Exactly.
They're like, the digital system, you go over there and that's the iPads are over there. And then you're like, but you can't, the line of sight and everything is obstructed and daylight. And you even mentioned like scent and smell and airflow and all of these, like, and there's this whole kind of conversation coming back around to like how we collaborate and how we can get sooner into those conversations with the likes of architects or even policymakers to ensure that what we get designed is kind of like a collaborative exercise, and it's really difficult.
Yeah, and I think great architects are absolutely thinking about that stuff. There's a firm here I know that does a lot of schools and hospitals and sort of public infrastructure, and they really do take a very, very much a co-design approach where they'll bring in teachers and students or patients and doctors and, talk to them. How do you need this to work for you? So great architects absolutely think about that. But I just think about the, so many of the completely soulless government buildings that I worked in, which just, they just break you.
They come from the 70s and
exactly.
you might have a cubicle and they are just ghosts of the past for most of us. Like, can I go back in time to a question that I probably should have asked a little bit more? Tell us what you do and where you're from.
Yeah, sure. So I work at the Centre for Public Impact. I lead the Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand team, which is where we started. Mm-hmm. What did you say? Beach?
Yeah, where you're from.
And so we're a global organisation and our mission is reimagining government so that it works for everyone. And that's a pretty audacious vision. Yeah. But what I love about it, and part of the reason I love working at CPI, is because a lot of people who sort of work in the government innovation space focus a lot on the tangible, visible elements of the system that need reforming. So how do we create new processes, practices, policies, legislation, etc., all of which is super important. But what we do at CPI, a big part of our focus is on the being, not just the doing, like not just how government does stuff, but how government is. So the beliefs and the values and the mindsets and the invisible sort of fabric, which has a very significant influence and interplay with the doing stuff. So it's not that you can just change mindsets, or you can just change the stories that we tell ourselves, or you can just change values. Sometimes the way to change that stuff is by changing the way things are done. But similarly, if you just focus on changing the way that things are done without attending to the underlying beliefs and values, etc., nothing changes. So the example that I often give is actually a design example where there's such a zeitgeist around co-design at the moment in government. Everyone talks about co-design.
Yeah, it's great.
And, let's apply this six-step process and do co-design and, great in theory. But if the people in government don't actually believe that people with lived experience have expertise and experience that's valuable, and as valuable as other forms of experience and expertise. It counts for not much, right? Because they go through the motions, but it becomes co-design theatre. And so what we do at CPI is really work with people in and around government to interrogate and surface those invisible factors that really hold the system stuck, and explore what would it take to start to shift that in order to really drive enduring change.
So in that work that you've outlined there, you must, and I'm assuming here, come across people that instantly, over time, whatever it is, you see that they've got that mindset and that's stuck, that nothing's going to change. And they could be in a leadership position. In those scenarios where you're like, okay, there's somebody here who's obstructing the change that you've been brought in to do, how do you navigate that? Because I know there's a lot of government workers out there who are speaking about they've got the mindset, their team at the seedling level within in organizations or in governments, they're really mature, but the rest of the organization is still in that mindset of like, it's control and command.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways of answering that question. The first is that we're a very small team in ANZ. So we're 5 people. Yep. So we work with collaborators, which sort of extends our capacity to do work, but we really only work with people who want to work with us. So we recognize that what we're talking about, it's like with coaching. You can't force someone to be coached. They have to be ready and willing and able to be coached. And then they meet you where they need you, with an openness of mind and sort of spirit, I guess. And that's a necessary precondition to the kind of work that we do. So we don't try and force it on people who aren't open or willing. But your question is like, well, what if you've got some people who are open and willing, but then the system that they're part of has an allergic reaction to the changes that they're trying to drive? Because that definitely happens. And what we talk about there is the idea of agency within constraints, because that's like the world. That's life, right? Like we live in capitalism, like we have leaders in really powerful positions who are not leaders who we would want, or choose. And if you allow the sort of the system around you to make you feel hopeless, then you can never do anything. So it's like, what can you do within the constraints that you're working within? We recognize you probably can't do everything that you want to do. Like, I would love universal basic income to be around tomorrow. It's not. It's not going to be. So I don't throw my hands up and say, well, bugger it, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to drink pina coladas all day. Yeah. I do what I can within the constraints of the current system. And I find allies and, I guess willing sort of co-conspirators who are happy to sort of walk alongside me as we nudge and push and take small steps in the right direction. So I think that what I definitely notice in government is that I think because the system often does feel so broken and the hierarchy feels so entrenched, there is a bit of a learned helplessness. And I think a big part of what we do as well is try to reinstill in people a sense of you can't do everything, but you can do something. So how can we help you find something that you can do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is your dog
just going to let my dog in. Yeah.
Oh, bring them on the podcast.
Come in.
Can they talk?
He thinks he can. His name's Oreo.
Yeah, my dog can. I haven't told anyone else though. my dog can definitely talk. Me and my dog have great conversations. Can I ask you about the organization? Okay, like you mentioned there that you're in Australia. There's 5 of you, and the headquarters looks like be in the UK. Then New Zealand as well. Like there's a colonial past of the territories that they're really operating in. How deep can you go into that area of unlocking the past and reopening it again for those conversations about how justice is delivered? In particular, I'm focused on justice in this conversation. And the reason why I'm looking at that is like there's remnants of how justice is delivered in Australia from my own experience. as a researcher, not as as someone who's gone through that system. But the same in Ireland as well. And I'd love to understand a little bit more around, I guess, the colonial side of those territories that you're working in. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't really speak for the UK because I only lived there for a few years, so I don't know a lot about it in terms of how it expresses itself now, how that colonial past expresses itself now in contemporary.
CPI is headquartered there, isn't it? So it's
correct.
Presumably getting funding from the British government as well. Is it?
I'm not sure whether they've got any partnerships with the UK government at the moment. It's a good question, but certainly in an Australian context, I mean, it's such a live conversation always, and particularly at the moment, because as I'm sure you heard, we had that referendum, which was devastating for Indigenous, not for all. It was a very, very complex situation. And there were very ardent no voters amongst the Indigenous population. And I had a number of conversations with First Nations people who were very strong no voters for all sorts of different reasons. So it wasn't a universal position taken by everyone, but on balance, my view was that it would have been, and I would say that the majority of First Nations people felt that it would have been a step in the right direction for this country, and we didn't take it. And that was completely devastating.
Can you just call it the referendum, just for people who aren't familiar with Australian affairs, which referendum you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to make sure I get it exactly right.
There was a title to it, and I was hoping you might know the title off the top of your head.
I just want to make sure I get the...
Take your time.
Because everyone sort of calls it the voice referendum.
Oh, yeah.
And basically what it was it was about... it was a constitutional referendum which would have established a mechanism or a body that would have been able to make representations to federal parliament on behalf of the Indigenous population. So it was about creating a mechanism, embedding in the Constitution a mechanism to give Aboriginal people a voice, basically. And that's why it was called the voice referendum. And in Australia, a referendum requires a certain number of votes, both like it's called like a double majority. So it needs 50%, more than 50% of the population, and in more than 50% of the states. And it was defeated quite robustly.
It was like 60-something percent.
So it was 60% no and 39% yes. Now, you could get into an argument around why that was. There were some technical reasons around a lack of bipartisan support. So apparently the only referendums that have ever passed in Australia have had to have bipartisan support, and this did not.
Yeah.
There was also the sort of a lack of detail around the proposal. Maybe that was a tactical error. But regardless of that, it was a referendum which made the majority of First Nations people that I work with and alongside feel pretty lousy.
Yeah.
And I think
education gaps as well, wasn't there? There was like problems within the framing. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, the problem is as well, the problem with constitutional votes, with referenda, is that they're binary. It's yes, no.
Yeah.
Right? There's no space for nuance or complexity or yes, but. And it's that, I think it's the binary nature of it that makes it both like very powerful, but also very hurtful, because it's like people said no to the voice.
Hard no.
That's how that's interpreted. So I think that's been hugely damaging in terms of the question that you asked. And thankfully for me, I live in the one state in Australia which has just gone through a treaty process and a truth-telling process. So other states have gone through truth-telling, but the Victorian government has just gone through a treaty process to essentially sign a treaty with First Nations people here in this state, which give them powers and rights that they've never had before. So that feels like a step to sort of repair some of the damage that was caused.
Yeah.
And then in New Zealand, in Aotearoa New Zealand, it's different again. And I have to say the integration of Maori culture and language into mainstream society in Aotearoa is incomparable. They're like at least a decade ahead of Australia in that respect.
Yeah.
However, the voting in of the Conservative government, again, which happened about probably 2 years ago now, has been terribly damaging. And a lot of the structures and institutions that were set up, which really recognised the autonomy and cultural were very sort of culturally sensitive, and gave a lot of agency to Maori people, have been unwound or disbanded or defunded, and it's just been devastating to watch.
Do you know, in that circumstance in New Zealand with the Maori people, the how services are accessed? Are they still defaulting to English in those contexts? Do you have any understanding of what that looks like, or do they still have to enter services through, that colonial lens? Was that ever done? Was that ever unpacked? I'm interested. I could never find that answer out online because everything I search for is in English, and there's not too many service designers I can find that might know that answer.
Yeah, Penny Hagen would know that answer. Do you know Penny? Yeah, you should definitely chat to Penny about that.
Penny. And Penny didn't get a response.
Oh, really? Well, do you know who's even better than Penny? Yeah. Angie, her co-CEO, because Angie is Maori.
You're not saying they're better.
Well, I'm saying that she is Maori, so she has the lived experience of what it feels like, and she'd be a brilliant person to talk to. Yeah. I can introduce you after this if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great, because I'm actually about to kick off a project with a local council in Ireland about a couple of local councils in Ireland about how we can rethink Oscailga, our native language, as regards access and services, as opposed to like click 2 if you'd like to speak Irish. There must be a way of unpacking how all of these services are being delivered and make it more native to our own kind of sort of perspective.
I saw something really cool, because one of the issues in Australia is firstly a loss of Indigenous language. There's just been a complete decimation.
It's eradicated.
But also the fact that there were many, many tribes who all spoke their own languages. So it's different to to other, like to Maori people who have a shared language. But K.A. McKercher, who I assume you know, created something recently that was like a sort of like a really accessible version of co-design. So it sort of takes all of the jargon and all of the fancy language out of, sorry, dogs.
All right, continue. I love background noise.
Okay. It takes all of the fancy, inaccessible academic language out and just says, this is what this is about. And I think sometimes in the kinds of spaces that you and I work in, like in design, in systems, in complexity, we can get so caught up in our own language that we forget how inaccessible it becomes to people who are 100%. Interested and would love to engage, but think, oh, I'm not smart enough for that. So it's like there's something about language as in terms of translation into a different language, but there's also language in terms of just how caught up we can get with our own jargon and how alienating that can be as well.
And ironically, I've been told human-centered design when people come on to my website, they're like, I don't know what that means. And I go, well, I do my very best to unpack it on the podcast. But there is an element of exclusivity around the language that is pervasive in what we speak about. I actually spoke to somebody. I spoke to someone I studied with when I did industrial design, and they actually looked at the website and kind of go, I don't know what a lot of this stuff is, like, you know. And I was like, wow, okay. Well, I talked to him, I sort of understand. And it's just, it slips in. Like, you know, I mean,
exactly.
Like, it's not like I'm sitting around kind of going, what word could I use here to make myself look better? I definitely don't do that. I told you, I can barely have the brain power to walk some days. So yeah, it is hard. Like, and any of that work is very powerful.
Yeah. And I think like, that's something we think a lot about in our work as well, the power of language and metaphors and what we choose to use and not use. So like, you know, I've heard people talking about, for example, more than human-centered design, which I think is an interesting sort of addition. And we actually had a really powerful example of what a change in language can do. So we were working with a group in Queensland who were trying to implement a new governance model where regional government, like regional centres, within Queensland, which is an enormous state, often feel like all the decisions are taken in the centre in Brisbane, and then the regions are told what to do and how to do it. And that does not create trust. And also Brisbane doesn't know what's best for Rockhampton or Mackay or, you know, because they're different places, so big. Yeah. And so what they're trying to do through this model is actually subvert that pattern and give regions much more power. And what the centre becomes is like a learning a learning partner for the regions to help them learn with and from each other. So the centre switches from sort of the doer to a facilitator of. But there's a whole lot of structural change that needs to happen to enable that to happen, and also cultural change. And so they engaged us as a learning partner to support them, the people in central government, to work out what do we need to be shifting, both in terms of the stuff we can see as well as the mindsets, all the stuff I was talking about before. Yeah. And one of the things that we did in that program was we encouraged them. They were one of the sort of sticking points was the sort of senior sponsorship of the model. So they were struggling to get people to come to meetings. When people came to meetings, they weren't really engaging. And we were talking about, you know, what can we do about that? And what those meetings were called were like, you know, they had some incredibly long acronym. They were called steering committee meetings. And because of the name of the meeting, all of these assumptions followed around what that meeting needed to look like. It needed to have a certain type of agenda, certain type of papers prepared for it, and it needed to be conducted in a certain way and held for a certain period of time. And we said, what if you didn't call it a steering committee? What if you called it a stewardship group? And what if you didn't call it a meeting? What if you called it a workshop? What would that enable you to do? Yeah. And just by changing the language from DDG steering committee meeting to stewardship group workshop, it just freed their minds to say, oh, well, maybe we don't need an agenda that looks like this. And maybe we don't need a whole lot of papers. And maybe we can make it shorter than that and actually ask people to show up differently. And they still talk about that shift in language as being such a powerful enabler of them, the team, to reimagine how they were going to host and sort of structure those gatherings, those meetings. And it also enabled people to show up differently because they were curious all of a sudden. It's like, what's this? A stewardship group workshop? I don't know what that is. So all of those patterns and assumptions around, I know what this is, I know how to be, I know how I relate and engage in these contexts was disrupted just by choosing a different way of describing the coming together of people.
Yeah, I love it. Hope you didn't mind me looking over my shoulder there. It is literally lashing rain here in Dublin at the moment. And I just wanted to double check the window was closed. On my mic, it's just like there's a thunderstorm, but it suppresses the noise. Thea, hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're really smart, okay, right? And I know a lot of people would be nodding along. Did you study law? Or like, how did you enter into this world of having so many, I'm hearing different lenses being used when you're speaking, and you're moving through the different layers from language all the way through to policy. And there's people out there I know who's studying design, and they listen to, the stuff that we're speaking about here, and they'd love to work in that space.
Yeah.
I'd love to understand your stepping stone of how you got to where you are. And again, I wasn't being patronizing or condescending. You're like, the stuff that you're speaking about here, you're distilling it down into a really accessible way of understanding it. And I think that's a very special skill. So like, I want to understand a little bit more about how you got to that point. Was that something that you always possessed? And what advice you give to people who want to follow in your footsteps, so to speak?
Thanks. Well, that's a really nice thing to say.
Okay.
I did study law. I studied law and like history and politics. And I think law teaches you a really useful way of thinking in some ways, in that you have to really break things down into their constituent parts. So it's a very orderly, rational, analytical way of thinking. And, I still say, I reckon my favorite job ever was I did tutoring when I was a law student. So like the Law Student Society just employed other students to in subjects that they were confident around to tutor other kids. And I loved the process of helping people understand concepts in the way that I understood them. And I think that is always something that I've loved doing. And I think it comes from two places. I think it comes from a place of confidence. And honestly, I'm like grateful to my parents for always telling me, if a teacher challenged me at school, they'd be like, well, that teacher is wrong. Like that was how I grew up. And so it gave me this deep, deep confidence that that what I said mattered and had value. And I think that often people get trapped in fancy language, or they don't ask the questions that they need to ask to really, really understand a thing, because they think, well, I don't understand it because I'm stupid. And I never think that. I think if I don't understand it, other people don't understand it. So I will ask questions until I really understand something. And that comes from a place of confidence. And the other thing I think that's really important is empathy. Because sometimes, I listen to people speak, and it happened to me just the other day. Like I was presenting, my daughter's in grade 5, and they asked actually a bunch of ex-lawyers and current lawyers to come and present to the class. And I was listening to some of the parents talk, and these kids were like falling asleep, falling off their chairs. And I was just looking at it thinking, how do these people not see what's happening in the audience and not recognize that the way that they're talking is not engaging for 11-year-old kids? And
or
it's
humans
like,
generally.
Exactly. And they were all incredibly thoughtful, incredibly intelligent people. But I think what they were forgetting to do was they were centering themselves, like, what do I want to say, rather than what do people want to hear? And so I think if you really put yourself in the shoes of the audience and think less about what you want to say and more about what others want to hear, that's a way of overcoming that tendency to sort of, talk about things in ways that aren't engaging or accessible to people.
Yeah. I think that you spoke about that, the mindset, and, one of the most powerful things that I learned to do with clients is bring them on the journey and have them watch research and have them be part of those conversations and realize that experience of the lived experience and that you're designing for them is just, it helps, kind of those mind shifts happen much quicker than being spoken to.
Yes.
But like when you speak about those parents, did they end the session knowing that they probably could have done it better, or were they just walking in this euphoric state of saying, yeah, I just showed those kids some magic? No, they didn't.
I don't know. I don't know is the answer. But, it was funny because I actually spoke last, so I was really in trouble, right? Because these kids were all like...
Well, what did you do? Tell us exactly.
I had kids like tongues lolling out the sides of their mouths, frothing.
Hitting their heads with rulers, kind of going, looking for any sort of feedback stimulation.
So the first thing I did was I got up and I asked them a question, which no one else had done.
What was the question? Come on, tell us.
Oh, well, it was...
Did you enjoy the other parents?
I wanted to ask that, but I didn't. No, it was, has anyone heard of copyright? Because I decided that I sort of listened to I didn't know what I was going to be talking about before I got there. And then I decided that once I listened to all the other parents speak, I was only a lawyer for 2 years. And so I wanted to find something to talk about that no one had yet. And I thought copyright's cool, right? Like that's a cool concept that kids can relate to, because it's like when you make stuff up, like then you can own it. And so, of course, and it's also something that I thought kids probably had heard of before, as opposed to insider trading, which is what the person before me was talking about.
Really?
Yeah.
How old are these children? What's grade
10
5?
and 11. 10 and 11, yeah.
Hopefully they're listening to this and they're going to see you at the school gates. I'm going to go, I see it. And you're like, yeah.
Heard what you said.
Yeah, I heard what you said. So,
but it was just the simplicity of thinking, what's an area of law that kids might relate to and find exciting? And how do I start with a question? And, you know, it was so easy. Like I asked, what's copyright? And, you know, all these excited hands popped up and someone told me what copyright was. And then another hand popped up and said, do you know that, you know, and that she had this story about this young kid who copyrighted something, who got $1 million, and the whole energy in the room just lifted. And then I spoke for a bit. It's not like I just asked them questions the whole time, but it was just such a simple thing. It's sort of to your point, like what you do as a designer is you listen, you bring people along, you engage, rather than just delivering to people. So, yeah.
But like, I think when not everyone can make that leap, when you're working in organizations, especially governments, and you realize that when you're researching, they have this moment where they're like, actually, we've probably delivered an awful lot of stuff. And either we researched too late or we didn't research at all. And like the power of actually researching.
And researching in a genuine way as well, right? Without confirmation bias, like being the leading force. Because I think that what a lot of research tends to do, and I'm sure I'm complicit in this as well in some of the research that I do, but is you look for answers that confirm what you're looking for, rather than actually starting from a place of genuine curiosity, genuine openness, and a willingness to actually move quite substantially from your own initial hunches. I think that's very rare in government. And in, as I say, I'm probably, I probably do that too.
So you went from law, you worked tutoring, and I've known that you've worked in the Premier's office in Victoria, was it?
Yeah. So what happened was I started feeling
pretty... How did you get that leap into innovation? Because I know lawyers who are like, I'd love to get more involved in this stuff. Like, it's too late for me, is one of what people say to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's never too late if you are willing to relearn. I've had to unlearn lots, like that's for sure. And I'm still unlearning things, because as a lawyer, you're taught that there is a right answer, right? And a lot of my work now, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work now sits in stark tension with that. But basically for me, it was recognizing the inherent limitations of the law made me leave the law and move. My logic at the time was I want to work in the place that shapes the law. So that's why I moved into policy in government. Worked there for about 10 years on and off while I had my kids. And then towards the end of my time in government, felt incredibly frustrated by the lack of collaboration, the lack of creativity, the lack of curiosity. And I thought, I need to take some time out to sort of understand why, right? Because there must be reasons why government operates this way. So then we moved over to the UK. And I did some study over there, and my study was really exploring those questions of
public policy.
Public policy.
You did public policy in London School of Economics, I think I saw.
Yeah, that's right. And then I also got a job at Nesta in the government innovation team. And that was really like a sliding doors moment for me, I think, because it just exposed me to a whole new world of people, a whole new language, a whole new realm of sort of literature that felt like this is what I've been looking for, you know, and I hadn't had a community doing like who I knew of doing that work. I hadn't had thinkers to rely on, and it really just opened up a whole new world for me that was, completely liberating.
So it was quite kind of recent enough then that you entered into this world in the last 10 years, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So up until that point, you're primarily functioning as a civil servant with a law lens, really, to view the work. What was it about the work in Nesta that kind of made a resonance with you? And I'd love to understand the gaps that you felt you had at that point. Because if you're working with, and maybe you didn't, maybe you're like, actually, I don't have any gaps. I'm completely perfect. But what does that look like? And the reason why I ask that, when I work with governments, they kind of say, well, I'm not a designer, Gerry. And I'm like, that's fine. I said, you don't have to worry about that stuff.
So it was a few things. I mean, it was design thinking was like super exciting to me when I stumbled across it at Nesta for the first time. And it was that idea of like, you don't need to have the answer first. You just start trying things. And then you see what works, and you make little tweaks. And I was like, that's what government never does. Government always tries to do all of the analysis and find all of the answers and then roll out a perfect thing. And design thinking was such a sort of revelation to me. It was like, oh my gosh, if government could do this, could start testing and modeling and adapting and learning and redesigning, like that would be revolutionary. So it was absolutely design thinking. It was, you know, Kat Drew at the Design Council. She was in local government at the time, though. Andrea Siodmak, who was running Policy Lab. So these incredible sort of design minds who I was exposed to, who were working in and around government, really sort of opened up a whole new way of thinking about what government, the tools that government could use, and the sort of, you know, the practices, the very established practices. So that was a big breakthrough. And then the other one was really systems and complexity thinking. And I think for me, that was actually, you know, like when I was at university, I studied Eastern faith and illumination as a subject. I read heaps of Buddhism when I was, you know, 16, 17, 18. And my whole, like, to go back to that LinkedIn post, like, I've always intuitively understood that everything is everything. I just haven't necessarily had a sort of a discipline to connect that into, you know, and often the way that concept expresses itself is through religion or spirituality. And I'm not a particularly religious or spiritual person. But when I started reading about systems thinking, I was like, this is the thing. This is like a framework for describing the way that I understand the world, which is the interconnection between things. And so, you know, it was a combination of like systems thinking and complexity and design thinking. And it was just like, it's just such a breakthrough.
Can I've just typed in, we're in the series of creating a range of small button badges, I know, for workshops and stuff like that. Hopefully everything is not copyrighted, because I might get one of these and post them over to you.
I love that.
And the name of the person who said it to you has sort of left my mind. But again, I'll send you a few of these as well. They're getting designed at the moment in a very 80s retro style.
Oh, I love that.
Just because I want people to wear them, like, as opposed to, like, you know, creating something that's very design centric. You're working with governments, you're working on change. And I guess one of the things that is probably in the conversations, like every other designer in the world, is the way things are shifting at the moment. So if government is down here at the moment and you're kind of moving in this direction, over here, and you're trying to work with these systems and move them forward. You've got this AI conversation that enters in, which is changing. By the time we finish this conversation, there'll be something new in an AI world. How do you stay ahead of this stuff? Like, if you've come from a law background, you've trained and you've worked, you've developed all this experience with both Nesta and now CPI. What does it look like for you as a practitioner, and how you can stay on top of this stuff? Is that something that is front of mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what we're always thinking about is, what's the CPI take on this stuff, right? So everyone's talking about AI at the moment. Everyone's thinking about it, but what can CPI usefully contribute to that conversation? So a project that we're about to kick off at the moment, we haven't quite got it across the line yet, so I won't say who it's with or exactly what it's called, but we've been thinking about it. A lot of people are thinking about, how can government use AI more effectively, and how is AI going to revolutionize government? And I actually did my master's thesis on the use of AI by frontline social workers. So frontline social workers in local councils were being given AI tools to help them make assessments of at-risk children. Yeah. And my master's thesis looked at how people were engaging with those tools. Were they ignoring them, which is called algorithm aversion? Were they deferring to them, which is called automation bias? Or were they using them as they were intended to be used, which is a combination of sort of human judgment and expertise and the insights that big data and sort of the AI analysis could give you? And I called that artificing, which was sort of a play on Herbert Simon's satisficing. But anyway, that's being really nerdy. So anyway, fast forwarding to now, the question that we're asking ourselves is less about how is government going to use AI, because as I said, heaps of people are using that, but how is AI going to change the people, the citizens that government serves, and how is government going to have to change as a result of that? So for instance, if people get really shitty government services, which a lot of people do, and they're people who potentially have not been used to getting great services from people because they're generally, not given the respect or time or energy that they deserve. Sure. And then they get access to an AI chatbot who responds to them whenever they want to, who gives them the answers that they need, who can actually give them access to information that they've never necessarily known how to access before. How is that going to change how those people interact with government services? How might it further undermine the trust and legitimacy that government holds in those people's eyes? And how is government going to have to respond and really lift its game in response to the access to information, care, responsiveness that people will be able to access as a result of AI that they've never been able to access before? So that's a project that we're sort of about to kick off.
So you probably get that done in a day, I'd say, that kind of project. You get the day's consultancy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I love the sarcasm from Aussies. You're right, mate. There's so much we can speak about and continue in this. And I've been actively trying to keep my conversations under 30 minutes. And you can see how well I'm doing this at the moment, where I'm going to try and wrap this one up. But I'd love to invite you back on in a couple of months to continue this conversation, because the work that you're doing, and also just generally the experience that you have, is really relevant to a lot of the conversations that I've been having professionally. And I'd love to invite you back on in a couple of months just to continue some of the train of thought that we've built up in this, if you're open to it. This is where
Thanks,
you say
Gerry.
yes, Gerry. Is it?
Absolutely. I'd love
I'll
that.
see. I'll speak to my people, and my people will speak to your people, and we'll see.
I don't have any people.
I'm joking. But there's going to be people with questions, I'm sure of it. Is it okay for people to connect with you on LinkedIn and ask questions? Is that your preferred way for people?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Yeah, definitely. I'm not always super responsive straight away on my messages, but I will get there in the end. So
absolutely.
LinkedIn is great.
Thea, I wrap every episode on This Is HCD by thanking people for their time, their energy, their space. I don't do any questions up front. I love having natural conversations, okay? And it's late in the evening for you as well. So giving me that time is really precious and really well received on my end. I thank you for that. But just generally allowing me to go from left to right and up and down and back and forth, and sometimes being a little bit clumsy with my language. Thank you for allowing me to do that. And thank you for coming on to the show today as well.
Thanks so much for having me. I love these conversations because I always am left with new questions and things that I'm wondering, and that's how I sort of get better at my job and practice as well. So thank you for so many thoughtful questions.
No, it's all good, and I will chat to you again in a couple of months.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gerry.